When my wife, Janet, and I marked our 12th wedding anniversary, it felt like just yesterday that we were childhood sweethearts. We'd been inseparable since we were 10, and by the time high school ended, I skipped the college route and started working as a draftsman at Desmond Engineering. A year later, Janet and I tied the knot, and the following year, we became parents to twin girls, Emily and Megan. We were young and broke, but we made it work. I gradually moved up at work, and our financial situation got better. Eventually, we bought a small home and had a couple of decent cars, not brand new, but reliable enough. Janet fulfilled her dream of being a stay-at-home mom, and with our stable income, she didn't have to worry about working. Life seemed perfect. Janet and I stayed fit and healthy. She was still as beautiful as the day we got married. She had this dark brown hair with bangs, giving her a bit of a Marie Osmond vibe, though she was a bit taller now, standing just over 5 feet. I hadn't changed much either, still had the build of my high school football days when I played as the right tackle. A year ago, a guy named Chris moved to our town from Lancaster and took a job as a surveyor at Desmond Engineering. We used to play football against each other back in the day, so we hit it off right away. He had also married his high school sweetheart, Lisa, a fiery redhead. Since they didn't have kids yet, Lisa and Janet became the best of friends, and they'd help us out with the twins whenever we needed a night off. Chris and I enjoyed hanging out, too. It was a nice escape from the usual routine. Janet and Lisa spent a lot of time together. They'd go shopping, attend parties, and join various club meetings. Chris and I would sometimes join them, but usually, we'd just let them have their fun. It wasn't long before Lisa started working as a secretary at Gilbert Engineering, just outside the city. About 6 months ago, I started noticing some changes. Janet suddenly had a lot more PTA meetings, which were now weekly instead of monthly. Lisa, despite not having kids, was always there too. And these Tupperware parties? They were happening more often, but Janet never seemed to buy anything. Then there was her growing collection of lingerie, which was odd because I never saw her wear any of it for me. Something wasn't right, but I kept it to myself. Chris seemed oblivious, and I didn't want to stir up any trouble without knowing more. One night, about an hour after we put the girls to bed, Janet came home from another of these basket parties. She took a shower before leaving, and the first thing she did when she got home was to take another shower. That struck me as strange. While she was in the bathroom, I checked the basket she brought home and found a set of black lace lingerie. Now, who wears black lace to a basket party? That's when I noticed the underwear was wet and sticky. It wasn't like me to go through my wife's things, but that night, I felt compelled to. I tucked the underwear into my pocket, feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Later that night, while she was asleep, I checked her phone for the first time. To my surprise, she hadn't deleted any calls for over a week. Most of the calls were to Lisa, but there were also a lot to someone saved under initials like KC, KH, and KW. I didn't know who these people were, but I quickly figured out that C might stand for cell, H for home, and W for work. When I checked her address book, Lisa had similar entries: Lisa C, Lisa H, and Lisa W. What caught my attention was that KW had the same work number as Lisa, but with a different extension. It didn't take much to guess that Janet was talking to someone who worked with Lisa, and that this Lisa had probably introduced them. Curiosity got the better of me, so I dialed KW's number. A recorded message answered, identifying the guy as Ken Sanders. He wasn't available, and the message asked me to leave a name and number. I hung up quickly, not wanting to leave any trace of my snooping. Janet popped her head into the room, asking if I was coming to bed. I told her I'd finished the book I was pretending to read and might fall asleep on the couch. Truthfully, I didn't want to sleep next to her that night. As I lay on the couch, trying to make sense of it all, I kept wondering what I could have done differently. Where did I go wrong? But I knew deep down that I wasn't going to take the blame for whatever was happening. The night dragged on, with my mind racing and the clock barely moving. All I knew for certain was that I had to get to the bottom of this, no matter what. The next morning, I woke up to the sounds of my girls making breakfast. Janet had encouraged them to take care of themselves more, and it looked like they were getting the hang of it. I stretched and scratched my head as Janet walked in, reminding me that I'd be late for work if I didn't hurry up. I casually told her not to worry, I wasn't going to work that day. She looked surprised and asked why. I simply said it was because I had too many personal issues on my mind. Yawning, I headed for the bathroom, realizing I needed a shower. When I came back, Janet seemed confused. The girls had already left for school, and I poured myself a cup of coffee, sitting across from her at the table. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern, like she was expecting something but wasn't sure what. I decided to cut to the chase. "Why don't you tell me about your novel?" I asked directly. She looked puzzled, probably thinking about some other book she might have mentioned, but I wasn't talking about literature. "Is this about you thinking I'm cheating on you?" she finally asked. I nodded. "Yeah, it is. So, what's this story you've been working on?" Janet, trying to appear composed, leaned back in her chair and sighed. "There's no romance, if that's what you're asking." I wasn't buying it. "Oh, I'm sure you're being honest," I replied sarcastically, "but that's not exactly reassuring right now." She sipped her coffee, probably thinking she had regained control of the conversation. I decided to change tactics. "Can you explain why you've been going to PTA meetings every week? The PTA secretary told me they only meet once a month, and you haven't attended in 6 months. That caught her off guard. "What are you getting at?" she asked, less confident now. I laid it out. "You and Lisa have been attending these so-called PTA meetings every Tuesday night, except they don't exist. So why lie about it?" Janet took a moment to answer, clearly trying to think of a plausible excuse. Eventually, she came up with something. "We've been going to Rosie's Cantina for ladies' night. 2-for-1 margaritas. We didn't tell you because we thought you and Chris might overreact." She seemed proud of her explanation, but I wasn't convinced. "I'm going to verify that," I said. "And sure, Lisa might back you up, but what will the staff at Rosie's say?" Her defensiveness grew. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, trying to shift the blame to me. "What about you? Why do you take showers before and after those little Tupperware parties?" I played along. "To get rid of the smoke smell. Those women smoke like chimneys at those things." She pressed further. "And why wear fancy underwear? Not for me, but for a Tupperware party?" I had no real answer for that, so I just shrugged. "Sometimes I just want to feel dressed up when I go out." Her lies were starting to frustrate me, and I could feel my anger building. It was time to stop playing games. "You know," I said, my voice growing tense, "I found your underwear last night. It wasn't just wet, it was sticky. And don't you dare try to tell me it's from a yeast infection." Janet squirmed in her seat, avoiding eye contact. I kept pushing. "So, you came home with soiled underwear. Why? I want an explanation." She finally broke. "Please stop," she begged, her voice trembling. "I can't take this anymore." My anger flared. With more force than I intended, I hurled my half-full coffee mug across the room. It shattered against the microwave, the loud crash making Janet jump. For the first time, she looked genuinely scared. She had never seen me this angry before. Leaning across the table, I demanded, "Tell me about Ken Sanders." She stood up, backing away from the table as if trying to escape the conversation. "He's just a friend," she stammered, but her tone wasn't convincing. I pressed harder. "Are you close with him?" Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "Yes." "And last night, did you sleep with him?" Her shoulders slumped, and with tears in her eyes, she nodded. "Yes, she admitted, her voice filled with regret. I'm so sorry. She stood there, sobbing quietly at the sink, while I sat back down, trying to process what she had just confirmed. My mind was racing, filled with a mix of anger, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. The only thing that broke the silence was the sound of her phone ringing. Janet glanced nervously between me and the phone. It's Ken, she said, as if I didn't already know. I reached over, hit the speaker button, and greeted him calmly, hello, Ken. You were calling Janet? He hesitated, obviously not expecting me to answer. Yeah. Is everything okay? I nodded at Janet, who was frozen in place. Janet's right here, I told him, and yes, we're all aware of the situation. In fact, I'll be stopping by to see you later today. I suggest you keep 911 on speed dial. Ken didn't respond immediately, so I ended the call. Janet stood trembling, wrapped in her robe, as if unsure what to do next. I decided to leave, but before I did, I asked her one last question. By the way, what's the name of that guy Lisa's been seeing? Janet's reaction was immediate. Don't ask me that, she pleaded, her voice rising in panic. When I insisted, she broke down completely, throwing her coffee mug against the wall in frustration. His name is Kevin Bostic, she finally admitted, her voice cracking. Please, just go. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my things and headed out the door, not entirely sure what I would do next. But I knew one thing for certain, I needed to talk to Chris. He deserved to know what was really going on. After I left the house, I drove straight to the office, hoping to find Chris. He needed to hear what I had discovered. When I got there, though, his desk was empty, he was probably out on a job site. Not wanting to wait, I called his cell. When he picked up, I didn't waste any time getting to the point. Chris, we need to talk, I said, my voice tense. It's about Janet and Lisa. They've been seeing other guys. There was a long pause on the other end before Chris finally spoke, his tone filled with disbelief. Are you serious? What are you talking about? I'm dead serious, man. They've been lying to us, about everything. Janet admitted she's been with this guy Ken Sanders, and Lisa's been seeing some guy named Kevin Bostic. I think they both met these guys at Lisa's work. Chris sounded like he was struggling to process what I was telling him. That doesn't make any sense. Are you sure? I'm sure, I replied firmly. Look, you need to ask Lisa about this guy Kevin. I bet she'll have some kind of story ready, but it's all lies. This guy works at Gilbert Engineering with her, and from what I can tell, she introduced him to Janet. Chris still seemed reluctant to believe it. Kevin Bostic. I know that guy, we graduated together. Are you sure there's something going on between him and Lisa? I wouldn't be telling you this if I wasn't sure, I said, trying to drive the point home. And it's not just Kevin. Janet's been sneaking around with Ken Sanders too. The whole time we thought they were just doing PTA meetings and Tupperware parties, they were actually meeting up with these guys. There was another long pause before Chris finally said, I guess I'll have to talk to Lisa tonight. But man, this is hard to believe. Just ask her, I said. And don't be surprised if she tries to brush it off or make excuses. After our conversation, I realized there was no way I could focus on work, so I went straight to HR to request some time off. It took just 10 minutes to hand over my responsibilities to another draftsman. As I was wrapping things up, Janet's phone rang. It was Lisa calling. I decided to answer it myself, pretending to be Janet. Hey, Janet, it's me, Lisa said, her voice sounding nervous. Chris found out. He's asking questions about Kevin. What should I do? Lisa, it's not Janet, I said, letting my anger show. This is her husband. And I'm done with the lies. If you want to talk, you can tell me the truth right now. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Oh my God. I thought I was calling Janet, Lisa stammered. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. What exactly didn't you mean to happen? I pressed. You two have been lying to us for months. Lisa's voice grew more frantic. I was just calling to tell Janet that Chris knows something's up. I didn't think it would get this far. Well, it has, I said coldly. And I'm sure Chris will be having a word with Kevin pretty soon. No, no, please. Lisa begged. Don't let him do that. This has already gotten out of control. Before I could respond, she hung up. Her nerves were clearly shot, and I knew things were about to unravel quickly. With nothing more I could do at the office, I decided to grab lunch and figure out my next move. I went to Taco Bell, which was quiet enough for me to think. While I was eating, I called my mom and dad to fill them in on what was happening. Mom, always the protective type, immediately offered to take the girls for a while. She said she'd stay with me during the week, and the twins could stay with them on the weekends. I appreciated her support more than ever. I knew I'd need all the help I could get to get through this mess. After lunch, I decided it was time to confront Ken Sanders. If I was going to get any closure, I needed to talk to him face to face. When I arrived at the Gilbert Engineering Building, the guys in the drafting department were eager to tell me about the commotion that morning. Apparently, Chris had already had a run-in with Kevin. The drafting department overlooked the parking lot, and the guys saw everything. Chris had caught Kevin before he could get to his BMW. What followed was an ugly scene. Chris threw Kevin over the hood of a car and started pounding on him. It took several security guards to break it up, and they ended up having to use a stun gun on Chris to get him to stop. Kevin was taken away in an ambulance, and Chris ended up in a police car. One of the guys pointed out Ken Sanders' office to me. When I got there, it was empty, looked like Ken had cleared out in a hurry. I walked past Lisa's desk on the way out. She wasn't there either, but it seemed like she hadn't quit yet. It was obvious things were falling apart quickly for both of them. I wasn't done yet. It didn't take long to get Ken's home address from one of the guys in the office. I headed straight to his place, a small ranch house with a white Lexus parked in the driveway. The trunk and back doors were open, and it looked like Ken was in the process of packing up and leaving town. When he saw me pull up, he panicked. He dropped the clothes he was carrying and ran back into the house. I couldn't help but laugh a little at his reaction. Clearly, he wasn't looking for a confrontation. I tripped over the pile of clothes as I followed him inside, but when I got in, I realized I wasn't about to chase him down. I wasn't like Chris, I wasn't looking for a fight. Instead, I took a look around. The place was pretty bare, almost like it had been rented fully furnished. Ken had clearly been planning to leave in a hurry. On the living room table, I found his cell phone, a folder with his passport, and some personal documents. There was also a cute little laptop on the dining table. I decided to help myself to these items, thinking they might give me some more answers later on. I had no intention of doing anything that could get me in trouble with the law, so I resisted the urge to do more damage. But I couldn't resist letting the air out of one of his tires before I left, just to slow him down a bit. I wanted to make sure he got the message that running wasn't going to be that easy. Next, I headed to the police station to check on Chris. When I got there, he and his brother were dealing with legal matters. I just waved and smiled at Chris, letting him know I was there for him. He seemed to have everything under control, so I decided to head home. When I arrived, Mom was already there, and dinner was on the table. We chatted briefly, and I went to my office to check out the items I'd taken from Ken's house. Before I could dig into them, though, Emily and Megan came home from school. I decided it was time to tell them what was going on before they started asking questions. As soon as the girls walked through the door, Emily, the more curious of the two, came up to me with a smile and asked, "Dad, why is Grandma here? And where's Mom?" I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation was inevitable. Your mom and I have decided to take a break from each other for a while, I explained as gently as I could. She's going to stay with her parents for a bit. Megan, who was always more perceptive, looked pleased for some reason. She turned to Emily with a smirk and said, "Told you I was right. You owe me $5. Emily scowled and crossed her arms. You were just lucky, she muttered. Confused by their exchange, I asked, "Wait, what were you two betting on?" Megan, with a bit of glee, answered, "I bet Emily that Mom was cheating on you." She didn't believe me. I was taken aback. You knew? I asked, my voice a mix of surprise and sadness. Emily quickly defended herself. I didn't think she would actually do that, Dad. I just thought you two were having a rough patch. Megan, on the other hand, seemed less surprised. It wasn't that hard to figure out. One Saturday, when Mom and Lisa said they were going shopping at the King of Prussia Mall, Mom wouldn't let me or Emily go with her. She said it was an adult shopping day, but when we got to school on Monday, some kid said they saw her with a guy at Nobles Grove. One of the girls even had a photo on her phone. Emily jumped in. We called them liars, but I started thinking maybe they weren't. I felt a knot in my stomach, realizing how much they had already pieced together. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked. They both shrugged, as if it were obvious. We didn't want to make things worse, Megan said. We figured if you found out, you'd do something about it. A couple of weeks ago, Tracy Mercer's parents had also seen Mom and Lisa with two guys at TGI Fridays in Allentown. They told Tracy, who then spread the word around school. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and it seemed like everyone but me had known what was happening. Before dinner, I called the girls into the living room to talk things through a bit more. I explained to them that their mom might try to separate us by claiming I wasn't fit to take care of them. I didn't want to scare them, but they needed to know what might be coming. Listen, I said, trying to sound as reassuring as possible, I'm okay with you spending time with your mom, and I want you to have a good relationship with her. But I'm not going to give up my right to be with you. You don't need to pick sides, but just be careful, okay? Don't believe anything that sounds off. Megan nodded confidently. We're smarter than you think, Dad. We love Mom, but we're not going to let her hurt you. Emily gave me a thumbs up, showing her support as well. I felt a sense of relief knowing that they understood the situation and weren't being fooled by anything their mom might say. After they left for school the next day, I sat at the kitchen table with my mom, who had been quietly supportive through all of this. She poured us both another cup of coffee and sat down beside me. John, she said, her voice soft and soothing, you need to take care of yourself too. Everyone is on your side, and the girls are stronger than you think. You've done a good job raising them. I nodded, feeling grateful for her reassurance. After a shower and shave, I dressed a bit nicer than usual, feeling the need to keep up appearances even though everything felt like it was falling apart. I grabbed all 3 cell phones, mine, Janet's, and Ken's, and headed out the door. It was a strange feeling, but I knew I had to be prepared for anything that might come up. First, I stopped by the Family Services office. I had a scheduled call with the caseworker, and I was surprised when I recognized the woman who came to greet me. It was Jody Mitchell, someone I hadn't seen since high school. Back then, she was part of the goth crowd, always sticking with her group and steering clear of people like me, the jocks. But now, she looked completely different, normal, even. Her desk sign read, J. Mitchell, and I figured she hadn't married. She smiled at me, obviously recognizing me as well. John, it's been a long time. What can I do for you? I stumbled over my words a bit, caught off guard by the memories of our high school days. Yeah, it has been a while, I finally said, trying to focus. Look, I need to know if there are any reports or files on me or Janet. She checked her computer and shook her head. Nothing on either of you. Looks like you've been doing fine by your girls, no reports of mistreatment or anything like that. I sighed in relief. That's good to hear. But, I need to talk to you about something else. Janet is planning to leave me and take the girls with her. I think she might try to make me look like an unfit parent to get full custody. Jody listened carefully as I explained the situation, nodding along. It's not uncommon, she said. But just because there's nothing in the system now doesn't mean she couldn't be gathering evidence. She might be getting medical records, police reports, anything that could help her case. I could feel my anxiety rising. So, what should I do? How can I protect myself and my daughters if she tries to pull something like this? Jody leaned back in her chair, considering my question. Come back tomorrow morning, she finally said. I'll see what I can do to help you. I agreed and left her office, feeling a mix of hope and dread. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but I was determined to be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I was at the Family Services office before it even opened. Jody arrived with her usual smile and a Starbucks cup in hand. Couldn't stay away, could you? She teased as she motioned for me to sit down. She apologized for not having more coffee and then got straight to business. John, she said, her tone more serious, I'm getting a restraining order against Janet. It won't stop her from seeing the girls, but it will prevent her from taking them out of state or denying you access to them. You'll have it by noon today. A wave of relief washed over me. Finally, something was going my way. I thanked Jody and left the office, feeling slightly better. But the relief was short-lived. As I drove around aimlessly, trying to clear my head, I realized that even with the restraining order, the situation was still a mess. I was losing grip on my life, and I didn't know how to fix it. When I finally made it home, Chris was there, sitting on the porch with a beer in hand. He told me that Lisa had moved out, heading to her parents' house near AFA. He planned to return to his place only until he could figure out what to do with it, sell it, rent it, anything to get away from the memories. He had spent the morning at the bank, the insurance company, and the lawyer's office, trying to salvage whatever he could. But it turned out Gilbert Engineering had no policy against fraternization, making it tough for him to get anything out of them. His lawyer told him it was an uphill battle, and he might be fighting a losing war. Chris also mentioned that while he was passing by the hospital, he found out that Kevin Bostic was being discharged. Calvin's wife had been trying to patch things up with him for years, but it seemed like this was the final straw. After Chris left, I sat on the porch, nursing a beer, and my mom brought out a meatloaf sandwich to share with me. She didn't say much, just sat with me in silence, which I appreciated more than any advice she could have given. Later that evening, Jody stopped by again. My mom went inside to give us some privacy, and Jody sat down beside me, politely declining the cold beer I offered. She told me she had served Janet the restraining order an hour ago, and it hadn't gone over well. Janet was staying with her sister, Carla, and from what Jody could tell, she was pretty shaken up. I didn't feel any satisfaction in hearing that. Instead, I felt a deep sadness. Why do I feel so bad if everything's under control? I asked, voicing my thoughts. Jody looked at me with sympathy. There's nothing good about a situation like this, John. Just less bad. We sat in silence for a few moments longer before she spoke up again. How about I come over tonight and explain everything to the girls? I get along with them, and I think it might be better coming from me. You don't want them to think you're blaming their mom, it might push them away. I nodded in agreement. Yeah, that would help. Thanks, Jody. She smiled and stood up to leave, but halfway to her car, she turned back and smiled at me again. I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope in that moment. That evening, Jody came over and spent some time talking to the girls. Chris and I used the time to go to his house and start packing up anything that belonged to Lisa. We didn't want any reminders of her left behind. When we got back, Jody was still there, and she stayed for dinner with us. I noticed she was avoiding me a little, and while I appreciated her help, I was also curious about why she seemed distant. After the girls went to bed, Jody finally sat down next to me. "You know," she started, "I've been visiting more for you than for the girls." That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She chuckled. "Well, I thought maybe you had some rule about not fraternizing with clients or something." I laughed, realizing how ridiculous that sounded. "No, no rule like that." She smiled and then, out of nowhere, brought up tattoos. "So, John, did you know I have tattoos? Surprised you haven't asked to see them." I was curious now. "Tattoos? You never struck me as the type. Where are they?" She winked. "That's for me to know and you to find out." Before long, we were playing a light-hearted game of finding each other's tattoos. I'll admit, it was nice to laugh and forget about everything for a while. We shared a bottle of wine, screw cap, of course, and talked late into the night. In the weeks that followed, Jody started spending more time at my place. At first, she was just there for the girls, but it soon became clear she was there for me too. Our relationship slowly shifted from professional to something more personal. By the time summer rolled around, Jody and I were together, and she was a regular part of our lives. Meanwhile, my dad's health took a turn for the worse. He had to move into a nursing home, and Mom spent most of her time with him. When the summer ended, and the girls were back in school, I got a call from Janet's father, Cameron. He wanted to meet and talk things over, so I agreed. The meeting was tense. Cameron, Janet, her sister Carla, and I sat around the table, and I could tell Janet had fed them her version of events. Cameron started by saying Janet believed I was overreacting and that I had coerced her into admitting things that weren't true. He asked what I expected him to do, prove she was lying or admit I was wrong. I stayed calm and laid out the facts. I explained the phone records, the photographs, and the lingerie I had found. I even showed them the text messages between Janet and Ken. Janet tried to cover her face in embarrassment as I presented each piece of evidence. Cameron and Carla were shocked, and Janet couldn't deny any of it. After the meeting, Cameron apologized to me for the way things had turned out. He told Janet she needed to find another place to live and assured me that they would support me in any way they could. Not long after, my divorce was finalized. Jody and I quietly got married in Maryland a year later, and she was pregnant with our first child. The girls were thrilled, joking about having a goth sister, and our new family settled into a comfortable routine. Janet eventually moved to Spain, where she worked at a travel agency in Barcelona. She sent postcards to the girls every year, always with pictures of windmills on them, but she never called. The significance of those windmills remained a mystery to us, but they seemed to mean something to her. Life moved on. Chris and I started our own small surveying business, with Gilbert Engineering as our major client. Chris stayed in touch, and we found out that Calvin had been downgraded to teaching electronics at a vocational school in Lebanon County. His marriage had fallen apart, and Lisa had remarried and moved to California. Ken Sanders didn't last long in Spain. He was back in the States within 6 months, but his whereabouts remained unknown. Chris always said I got off too easy with Ken, but I was done with that chapter of my life. I had my family, my business, and a future to look forward to. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I realize that life has a way of moving forward, no matter how painful the past may be. The girls are growing up fast, Jody and I are excited about our new baby, and for the first time in a long while, I feel at peace with where I am. The past is behind me, and though the scars remain, I'm ready to embrace whatever comes next.
Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting tales. Warm regards.